One of Donald Trump's own senior economic advisors has now openly acknowledged that the idea of refunding tariff money and turning it into direct payments for Americans is, in plain language, a mess. The advisor explained that if tariffs were ever ruled unconstitutional and the government were forced to return that money, the process would be extraordinarily complicated. Tariffs are technically paid by importers at the border, not by consumers directly, even though the costs are often passed along later. So if refunds were required, the first recipients would likely be the importing companies, who would then somehow be responsible for figuring out how much of that cost they passed on to customers, and then distributing refunds accordingly. Even saying that out loud makes the problem obvious. There is no clean mechanism to trace every dollar through thousands of supply chains, contracts, and price adjustments. That is why the advisor argued the Supreme Court would never order such refunds, not because the law is clear, but because the logistics would be overwhelming. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Today, we're diving into how the promise of tariff-funded payout sounds powerful on the surface, but collapses once you look at the law, the math, and the reality that even the people pushing it admit there's no clear way to make it work. The problem with that argument is simple. Courts are not supposed to decide cases based on administrative inconvenience. The Supreme Court's job is to decide whether something is constitutional, and that is exactly the question now hanging over Trump's tariffs. The tariffs were imposed using emergency powers under a statute that was never clearly designed to authorize broad trade taxes. When the issue was argued before the court, several justices appeared skeptical that those powers stretch as far as the administration claims. If the court ultimately rules that the tariffs exceeded presidential authority, the consequences could be severe. The government has collected hundreds of billions of dollars under those tariffs. A ruling against the administration could force refunds, or at the very least halt future collections. Even the most generous outcome for the White House would still be damaging. The court could stop the tariffs going forward without ordering refunds, sparing the administration from a massive administrative headache. But even that scenario would collapse Trump's parallel promise to send Americans direct payments funded by tariff revenue. The entire idea depends on the tariffs continuing to exist and generating large amounts of money, and yet administration officials continue to talk about these payments as if they are inevitable, even while admitting they cannot explain how or when such checks would be sent. When pressed directly on whether Americans should expect these payments, officials repeat the same talking points. They say the president wants it to happen. They say legal options are being explored. They offer no timeline, no structure, and no concrete plan. In practical terms, that means everything depends on the Supreme Court, and even if the court sides with the administration, the plan still faces enormous obstacles. At this point, it is worth translating the political language into plain English. What they are really saying is that nothing can happen until the court rules, and even then, the idea may still be impossible to execute. This pattern should sound familiar. Trump has repeatedly promised financial windfalls to the public that never materialized. He has talked about massive payouts, cost savings, and economic miracles that fall apart when basic math is applied. A recent example involves his claims about cutting prescription drug prices. Trump has publicly boasted about reducing drug prices by multiples that defy arithmetic. A reduction of 100% means a product becomes free. Anything beyond that would mean the seller is paying the buyer to take it. That is not a policy achievement, it is a mathematical impossibility. When leaders speak this way, it signals either a profound misunderstanding or a disregard for reality. Either way, it leaves the public chasing illusions. The same issue applies to the tariff payment promises. Trump insists that every American earning below a certain income threshold should receive a substantial check. When you do the math, the total cost far exceeds the tariff revenue collected. Even under optimistic assumptions, the numbers do not line up, and none of this addresses the fact that any such program would require congressional approval. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have already signaled that the votes are not there. Many see tax credits or rebates as a far more realistic alternative, an idea Trump himself continues to reject. There is also precedent for skepticism. Similar promises were made when a government efficiency initiative claimed it would save vast sums of money that could be returned directly to citizens. Those payments never arrived. What we have instead is a familiar pattern of bold claims followed by quiet abandonment when reality intervenes. If the Supreme Court ultimately rules against the administration, the situation becomes even more chaotic. Officials cannot clearly say who would receive tariff refunds. Would it be corporations? Would it be consumers? Would it depend on individual transactions? The answer, even from within the administration, is that it would vary case by case. That uncertainty alone illustrates how poorly thought through the policy has been from the start. The broader consequence is that the tariff strategy has already put strain on the economy. Trade disruptions, higher prices, and market uncertainty have slowed growth. Now, layered on top of that is the risk of a legal ruling that could turn the policy into a financial nightmare. And yet, against this backdrop, Trump continues to talk as if Americans should expect checks in the mail, as if economic law and arithmetic are optional. Meanwhile, economic indicators tell a less flattering story. Job losses have increased, unemployment has ticked upward, and even traditionally friendly business media outlets have acknowledged growing weakness in the labor market. These are not abstract numbers. They reflect real people losing work while being told to expect money that may never come. The bottom line is straightforward. The tariff plan was legally shaky from the start. The promise to redistribute tariff revenue as direct payments was never grounded in a workable framework, and the ongoing insistence that it will all somehow work out ignores constitutional limits, congressional realities, and basic math. Political fantasy may sound good in a speech, but it does not pay bills and it does not survive scrutiny. So if you hear promises of easy money funded by policies that are still being challenged in court, take a breath and look at the facts. Grand declarations are cheap, execution is hard, and in this case, even the people closest to the policy are admitting that the entire structure rests on hope rather than reality.